I'm here really to dive into a topic that I think has been extremely exciting for me. Is anybody excited about captions, closed captions, or subtitles, or any audio description, anything like that? I got a woof from iShot. I don't know if this is a good thing or not. Some people are, some people are. I think in my life, this has been a very, very important journey and a very important kind of part of what I was doing for the last year or so. So first of all, my name is Vitaly, and for the last 16 years, I've been working on creating Smashing Magazine, which is a magazine for designers and developers. But what many people don't know is that a lot of time of my life is actually spent somewhere entirely different. Right now, I'm working on a very exciting, I would say, project, which is European Parliament's project, which is actually a galaxy of 139 different websites that need to be kind of put together, very much like the gov.uk model. And that brought us to a lot of challenges. One of the things that we, of course, have is a multimedia center. Now, the multimedia center has photos, it has audio files, it has videos, it has captions. They all have to be available, at least some of them have to be available in 24, sometimes 26 different languages. They need to be fully accessible. They need to be fully GDPR compliant. And there are many, many limitations that come along with it. So one of the questions that we asked ourselves, and this was the challenge that I was tasked with, is how can we design the first-class, sustainable digital experience for everybody, including people who are hard of hearing, including people who are hard of seeing, including people who can only rely on words. So this is where I'm coming from. And that brought me to a really strange place, because actually, if I'm being very honest with you, for quite a long time, I had no idea about the difference between all these different terms, the captions, the subtitles, the closed captioning, open captioning, and so on. Right? For me, when I thought about captions, when I thought about subtitles, I always thought about this. Now, before I continue here, I want to ask you first, do you turn on captioning or subtitles by default whenever you're watching Netflix or Prime or anything else? Please write a yes in the chat if you are. Yeah, I see a lot of yeses, a lot of no's, a few sometimes, right? That will really heavily depend on a person. So I had no idea. I thought that this is just me, that it's only me who is more or less interested in actually viewing things in original audio track and then actually following it along with subtitles or closed captioning to never miss anything. Well, I was wrong, because when I started looking and studying, I realized that the world is really complicated. Now, when we're looking into the world of captioning, these are all the things we potentially could have when it comes to captioning UX. So I don't think that this term exists, but we're kind of going to get into what we ended up doing for the European Parliament as well. So we've got subtitles, we've got voiceover, we've got closed captions, we've got open captions, we have transcripts, we have audio description, we have on-screen text, we have auto-generated captions and chapters for videos. And then, of course, when we talk about videos, we also will have video chapters design. They also look different, be it on YouTube or anywhere else. Search and timestamps as well that you can jump to, and overall video player UX. Now, for this talk, just to kind of be on the same page, when I talk about captions or when I talk about closed captions specifically, I'm talking about on-screen text descriptions that I use to describe audio content on video, right? That's kind of where I'm coming from, just so we're all on the same page. Obviously, we'll find slightly different definitions here and there, but this is kind of where I'm coming from. Now, when we think about captioning in general, I think that many of us have this notion of, oh, this is something that we use for noisy environments, maybe busy environments, maybe in airports, maybe when there is something else happening or anything in between. Now, what happens really is that captions are used in many different places and many different scenarios. They are, of course, used for noisy environments, but they're also used a lot for any kind of video content. It's actually quite difficult to imagine any piece of video content published on the web today without any proper subtitles or captioning in place, right? Also social media, when it's shared, real-time communication, things like this, Zoom, Google Meets, and so on, any kind of games, courses, they have become very universal and very important, right? Especially when we're talking about cross-cultural communication. And don't worry, I'm going to share the slides with you anyway, so you don't have to frantically take notes or screenshots, right? So that's important. Of course, one thing we should not forget is that captioning is connected to accessibility. So captions can be the only way for people who are hard of hearing to actually consume audio content, right? They might have, the situation where they're hard of hearing permanently or temporarily, but that would be the only way for them to consume audio content, right? And the reason why I'm putting all of this in here to make it very, very clear is that very often using captioning is not something that you have to do because of your constraints or because of restraints or impairments, but something that people choose to do. Why is that? When we look at the data, what we find out is, especially this is a big study that was conducted in the US, almost every second person using subtitles most of the time when watching movie, program, or anything, right? And what is a little bit surprising, you would say, well, maybe it's people who have some issues about understanding content, or they don't speak the language or anything like that. What is actually quite surprising is that of these 50%, 70% are probably going to be from Generation Z, right? Then 53% millennials, Gen X, 38%, baby boomer, 35%. So the younger you are, the more likely you are to use captions, right? Now, talking about the reasons why people use captions, it's always pretty much the same. Audio is muddled. You can really barely understand what people are speaking about. Accent is hard to understand. They just want to watch quietly at home, or they want to stay focused on screen. Or, it's also a learning opportunity. You want to learn a new language. And actually, often watching movies is actually a really, really good way of doing that. Right. And there are a few more things that you can also find here in the slides. But one thing that was really interesting is that, people think, and I'm wondering if you have the same feeling as well, that 35% of people say that actor and TV personalities talk faster than they used to in the past. Do you think so? That might be true. And then 44% say that the visuals of recent productions are not as well lit as they used to be. Like, you think about all these dark movies, the Batman and the Knight Rider and all of that. It's impossible to decipher characters, not even see what they are talking about. Like lips, it's very, very difficult, right? So things have changed. Everything is dark. And so there are many different reasons. Now, it's a little bit off topic, but I do have to show this one. The hardest to understand celebrities and TV shows, by far, number one, Peaky Blinders and Tom Hardy, which happened to be kind of winning the first place in both categories right here, which is totally true. I couldn't understand anything when I was watching Peaky Blinders. But then you also find Downton Abbey, right? Ozark, and a few others, right? Benedict Cumberbatch, I am really, really horrible at pronouncing his name, and so on and so forth, right? So there are plenty of kind of things to keep in mind here. All right, but of course there are benefits of captioning. And I was speaking specifically about how to, Caitlin, if you don't know Ozark, I highly recommend you to watch it. That's a really good series, but totally off topic. Benefits of captioning. Right here, well, one thing that people also mention, contextual details, better understanding of accents, technical issues, maybe poor audio levels, things like that, sarcasm, and that's kind of missed, anything that kind of missed between the lines. People really want to understand everything. And there was this really nice paper that was published, I think, 2 years ago, about Generation Z being obsessed with perfection. Obsessed. They need to understand. I don't know if you belong to Generation Z. That's fantastic. I have nothing against you at all. But obsessed with perfection, understanding every single detail, every single noise, every single word, every single name, everything. So this is why it's very common for Generation Z, for example, to keep coming back, kind of rewatch or replay what they didn't understand, right? So that's that. But we also need to be very, very clear what we're speaking about, right? There are all those different things. By the way, one of my favorite quotes that came from our usability session when we were testing is, there are different life situations. And when I heard that, we are turning on captioning when our cats start barking or snoring, or when neighbors are loud, that's interesting. I've never heard that before, but there are plenty of different use cases where we would be turning on captioning. So captioning is cool, but we never really designed it. It's just there. We just have some text and we just put this text on screen and that's it. So it's probably the time to start designing captioning experience and redesigning captioning UX. And for that, we need to understand first, what are the difference between all the different things we talked about so far? We have captions. Now, captions are part of accessibility. They're designed for people who are hard of hearing to access audio information with speaker IDs and sound description. That's captions. So when I talk today about captioning, that's what I mean, right? designed for people who are hard of hearing. But at the same time, you also get audio description. That's also part of accessibility, but it's designed for people who have problem with kind of visual impairments. So we want them to access details about crucial visual elements, right? Let me kind of explain it a little bit more. Now, I'm going to play an extract, and I hope that you will be able to hear it. It might be a little bit loud, so please turn down your volume just in case. I don't know how it's going to be transmitted via Zoom. And this is what you're going to get with audio description.
Wolf or dog on a leash? No. This is fine. It's normal. It's fine. And if it feels like it's not, maybe I'm the problem.
Oh, these are captions.
Joe turns onto his side, still wide awake. Now, a flash of light recedes, and the word "you" appears in giant white letters, which become saturated with blood.
Okay, this is not very beautiful image, but you get the idea, right? So in the beginning, we have the captions, and then we actually move into audio description. But then we also have subtitles. And subtitles are part of internationalization. This is not a part of accessibility. They're designed as a translation from one spoken language to another written language for people who can hear. That's different, right? So, and very often it's kind of all a little bit, not mixed, I would say, but sometimes we get captions, sometimes we get subtitles, sometimes we get audio descriptions. And when we look back here, right, specifically at this overview, in the very beginning, right, what we saw just in the beginning were subtitles, right? Just subtitles. I always mix them up, sincere apologies. So we just have subtitles, which is basically written text, which really is for people who can hear, but want to understand every single word. But then closed captions are a little bit different because they can also include more information about things that are not necessarily said. It could be the music, right, in the background or things like that. We'll talk about it in a moment. And then you also get this audio description, which is basically an audio description of visual content. Does it make sense, everyone? These are the three terms that often are going to come up with those kind of things, right? So that's quite significant to mention here. Right. Okay, now with this in mind, we also get captions, and there are open captions and closed captions. Please bear with me. I know this is just definitions, probably the most boring part of it all, but it's really important to understand this. So we have open captions and we have closed captions. Now, open captions cannot be removed. Like sometimes you watch a video and you cannot turn off subtitles. They just burnt into the video. This is very common for social media, right? And in fact, this is where we probably will be using them because there is no really way on Twitter, let's say, or LinkedIn or anywhere else to turn off subtitles, captions, sorry, because very often you get them just displayed, right? But on the other hand, very often you will be relying on closed captioning, right? Which are text descriptions on a separate track that you can turn on and off. So very often when we speak about, again, better experience, we're speaking about closed captions because, again, they might not be for everyone. For a very simple reason, because some people get distracted by closed captions. Some people have a really hard time actually focusing on the video because they always have text in front of them. And one of the common things that shows up in user interviews, actually, people complain about closed captions when they're watching stand-up comedy. Why is that, everyone? Do you have an idea why is that?
It ruins the jokes.
Yes, exactly, because it ruins the jokes. Because they come too early and there is no this point that the comedian tries to build up. So it's not for everyone and it's not for everything, right? That's quite significant in there. Now, fortunately, when it comes to the way of how we actually write closed captions, there are plenty of rules and guidelines around that. You just type it in and then you find a lot of conventions. And again, there is a lot of confusion, I guess, between subtitles, captions, and all the different things. But there are different ways of defining it, and they are well defined. Now, Garrett Ford Williams from BBC has done an incredible work around that, defining this kind of rules of captioning, where, whatever contextual information you want to communicate, right, be it a whisper, be it a stammer, be it like a sarcastic statement or sarcastic question, there's kind of almost sort of a vocabulary that you could be using today to define, kind of write better, specifically for screen, right? And there are a few things that I found quite important or interesting, because for my own video course, I had to edit captions as well. And that was really a new world for me because I had no idea how to do it. So there are a couple of things which are really interesting. On the one hand, you have the pyramid pattern, where if you have, let's say, 2 lines of text, right, they would probably try to make sure that they are of the same width, right, or length. So like 40 characters on the top line and a little bit less on the bottom line. So it kind of goes like this. However, very often it actually goes like this, right? And what we also should be thinking of is that whenever we're looking at how long characters should stay on the screen, right, we usually think about 20 to 30 characters per second, and a sequence can last at most 8 seconds on the screen, and then it needs to be replaced with something else. Otherwise, people either get not confused, but kind of stuck in looking at the screen thinking, should something else come up or not? That also depends if you are hard of hearing or if you are hard of understanding a foreign language, right? On top of that, a common way of defining it would be if you want to make sure that somebody is clearly defined, you probably want to put the full identification, the name, the title, or anything else that you want to have on the same line instead of breaking it across multiple lines. And then, of course, we probably need to structure it properly with metatextual information, be it music, voiceover, additional hints, change of characters, and so on, right? So these are, again, very well defined, and you will find them all here really, really well defined in a lot of detail, right? And if you want to dive even deeper into this, there is a whole guidebook on this, on captioning key, on the Scribed and Captioned Media program, which I highly encourage you to download and check if you're interested in these kind of things as well, right? But these are just basics, right? Frankly, this was just a part of the research I had to do for the project. But then one other thing that we started looking at and we started finding on the web is really taking captioning and thinking about how can we design this experience better natively. If we had to design it from scratch, what would it be like, right? Because again, very often it seems like just an additional layer that lives on top of audio and video, right? And potentially we could really start thinking about designing it from scratch. So I'm going to show you a video of what it could look like, right? And please write a plus in the chat if you like it, and please write a minus in the chat if you do not. So let's go. I hope you will be able to hear audio as well.
I really enjoyed making things, but I was getting very tired of making other people's ideas. And I was getting very cynical about the world of advertising. So a lot of the work we were doing was making TV commercials to try and sell products that I didn't particularly like very much. So age 29, I applied to the Royal College of Art to do a course called Design Products. Ron Arad, the architect and designer, had just taken over the professorship of that course. I was offered a place and started there, and that introduced me to, I guess, the kind of work that we still do to this day, sort of critical design, using design to question technology. Right. Building lots of interesting...
So the idea is basically here, well, why don't we give people control about where and how they want the subtitles to appear, right? So I agree that it's a little bit more artsy, right? It's more artistic in a way. And one thing that might be very strange, and we'll talk about it in a moment as well, is to see subtitles on the top. That's a little bit weird to people, typically, right? Because normally we see subtitles, of course, at the bottom, right? Oh, captions. I mean, at this point, I think we're looking at subtitles, right? So that's quite interesting. So one way that you can do it here is really can kind of adjust and customize the video player experience along with the titles, right here. Okay, but then we also saw something entirely different over the last couple of years, right? And I agree fully with Hema here. It's very hard to watch the video and read the subtitles in such a big font size on the side. So it's kind of one or the other. And there are many pieces of information that we have. We have one over here, we have one over here, we have potentially one over here, and then also obviously here, right? So there must be a connection between where the person is speaking, right, and where we display captioning or subtitles, that's for sure. But I do like this idea of customizing really at this point to give people some choice about how this captioning or subtitles experience is going to look like, right? Now we saw this being kind of natively integrated in here, but also it can be natively integrated in other places. Like, for example, here. Many of you might have seen Sherlock, I think, right? And you probably noticed that they actually play a lot with this idea of really natively integrating this kind of subtitles, really, or just text messages, I would say, into their movie. So let's take a look here.
One of the reasons I like filmmaking is that sometimes you have to design a solution to a particular stumbling block. For example, how do you show a text message in a film? It's an interesting conundrum. Texting is kind of visual, so in theory this shouldn't be hard. And yet every time a filmmaker cuts to an insert of a phone, you can hear the audience yawning. A lot of films just make it so the characters don't text, or they read the messages out loud like idiots. Or worse, they invent some reason for the phones not to work.
97% nationwide
this is basically
coverage,
just
and
a
we find ourselves in the
very long
3%.
video that's kind
But
of
in the last
highlights
4 or 5
all the
years,
different
something
ways of how it moved.
Adopting a new formal convention, the on-screen text message. It has exploded in just a few years. I first noticed it on the BBC version of Sherlock. But after consulting Twitter, we found earlier examples in soap operas,
right? And kind of
teen
keeps
movies,
going and going. So this is
and in
kind of a
films
very
from
long
South
video.
Korea.
But this really is interesting because in many ways, what we see happening in movies is really defining or designing this kind of text on screen experience from scratch, which is actually pretty interesting, right? And there are a few ways of how we can actually do that. Here is an interesting one, which again is very, very different. And I know that all of those things are kind of a little bit of experiments, but I think that it's only through experiments that we can actually get to a better place. So take a look at this.
You throw another moon at me, and I'm gonna lose it. Stork, you know me? I do. You're not the only one cursed with knowledge.
So what we
Only
see
curses
here is kind of more like a comic book style of thing, where with subtitles or caption subtitles, I guess more, deeply integrated into the video, to the point that what you probably cannot see is this incredible fact that whenever you have this movement, right, as kind of somebody throwing something, then the video player also starts shattering as well. And then whenever there is this light or lasers or whatever, you also get this glazing laser effect coming in from the video player as well. So that's, again, you might think, oh, okay, this is just confusing and strange. Why would you do that? Well, again, we're trying to break out of the typical ways of how it's sometimes designed. Because again, if you are hard of hearing, for example, you might want to be a little bit more engaged, or maybe not. That must be also a choice that you're kind of following here. So again, if you just look at it in a bit more detail, obviously we have just regular text, right? But on top of that, we also have some special effects that are kind of highlighted using text, right? And then of course, we also have this glowing, which actually happens on the level of a player right there as well, right? That's all pretty neat, right? A little bit experimental, but let's go with it. Okay, so we could actually try to make this experience a little bit more integrated or native. What else? Now, there is this very old problem that we have been having like for many, many, many years. Of course, when it comes to subtitles, we also need to allow people to select language. And very often, I see the same issues appearing over and over again. The issue of using flags, but flags are not languages. While flags are specific to countries, languages often cross borders. So if we target users from a specific country, then flags are fine. But if we're targeting users from specific languages, then they are not, right? So when we look at, I don't know, any kind of interfaces, not necessarily now captioning or video players, right? Very often we will find interfaces like this, right? Or maybe sometimes you get this hover effect as well, right? But then the question that I ask myself, okay, in which language should that be? Should it be now in English? Should it be now in German? Now that we have a German flag. And also when you have a German flag, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's targeting Germany, because the language is Deutsch. It doesn't mean that you are from Germany, but you're speaking German, right? So that's a little bit confusing. And so very often what we really need to keep in mind is that when we are designing this kind of experience, probably we do not want to rely on flags altogether, unless, again, we're targeting specific users of a specific country. So what, of course, is more convenient and classic is to use just more global icons like this. And also when it comes to selection of a language, we will probably be using something along the lines of this, right? Where, and I think it's important, we want to label languages locally. right? And so when it comes to a selection of language within a video player for subtitles or captioning, right, we need to name the language in its local format. So rather than offering a choice in German or Chinese, we need to label them as Deutsch, and unfortunately, I do not speak Chinese, right? Like this. So that's probably going to be a bit more reasonable. What else could we do? We could also enable search. With search, viewers could jump to a specific part of the video as every sentence is linked to the timestamp within it. And you probably have seen something similar already on TED, right? Where we basically get the video.
You know, it's a lot harder.
And then
than
you
it
can
seems like it
choose the
should be.
subtitles in which you're going to
Actually
speak,
feeling
in which you want to hear
What I
it,
mean
right?
by that
But at the
is that we
same
all
time, you also
constantly
get a
do-
transcript on the right, where you can choose a language of your choice and then actually follow along there. But it's more about like really reading it. And what I really miss in this kind of experiences, and this is what we actually want to change, is to give people a way to search through transcript to jump to a specific segment that might be interested to them. Additionally to that, we also need to design video chapters, of course, on a video player. That's always helpful too, right? But this search could be very, very helpful. And you'll see in a moment why I think it's actually quite critical. Very similar to what we do with Zoom, right? On Zoom, you can actually search within the entire transcript and jump specifically to that segment of the video, which is actually very valuable. But another thing that's really, really kind of sometimes frustrating me, especially in interfaces which are maybe a little bit older. And again, in the context of European Parliament, we cannot use Vimeo, we cannot use YouTube. It needs to be a custom solution, so we can do whatever we want, basically, because of GDPR regulations, of course. So we need to really think about all the best practices for designing UX around captioning and subtitles. And one thing that was very, very clear from the start is that we need to decouple audio and closed captioning, because not everybody prefers to read captions in the same language as the original video track. And sometimes captions include detailed audio description only in some languages, right? So we always need to split audio track and subtitles, or captioning, whatever you want to call it. So that is very critical. And even further, if you're looking at some educational software, you'll find multiple languages being used at times as well. So if there are multiple people watching at the same time, all of them can actually follow along as well. So you also find it actually ironically used sometimes in schools when you have a lot of students or pupils coming from different backgrounds. That could be very helpful too, right? I know that I have only 2 minutes left, but I just want to finish with a few thoughts, and then I'm all in for the questions. I think that this is where we actually start really getting to something where people want to be, and that's customization. There is a rare any sort of customization when it comes to subtitles or captions. Again, we can choose sometimes font, we can choose sometimes colors, and in fact, we get this. Like, for example, when we look at YouTube, we get a lot of them, right? Just a lot. But then I would say there are some that are definitely missing. Like, for example, when it comes to this, I don't want to be in a position where we're actually selecting a font family specifically. I want to have presets. So ideally, what I would love to have is this, where maybe we could say, hey, here is a preset for dyslexic people, right? So that's using one of the fonts that is actually optimized, right, specifically for dyslexia. Or maybe we could also have high contrast modes. Just choose one of the contrast modes and you're done. You don't need to choose and jump between the different fonts and adjust the opacity from 0.9 to 0.7. That's just too technical. We don't need that, right? And at the same time, it might be a good idea to really think about the position of subtitles as well. We see, like, let's say, Netflix playing with this a lot. Like, sometimes whenever you have something important being displayed at the bottom, the subtitles will show up at the top, or sometimes on the right, sometimes on the left, depending on what language you use. But then what you also find is an interesting study from 2015 done by BBC, where they decided to test what the experience is going to be best with subtitles within video and over video. And what you see here are basically 4 different designs that they actually ended up with. On the one hand, we have subtitles within video. Right here, you probably see this little kind of opacity of maybe 0.7 or 0.8, where text lives on top of the image. Then here, the text lives under the image, right? You might see that. Here, you also get a slightly different size of the video and also slightly different size of the text. And then here, kind of the same story with subtitles over video too. Just differences in size between this one and this one. So what was really exciting is to look at the paper that they published on online news videos, the UX of subtitle position, where they actually studied the UX of different positions in there, right? And really looking at it from different perspectives. And what they discovered was actually quite interesting. The positioning subtitles below a video clip in a web browser rather than within increase experience or use engagement, I guess, actually. This was also mirrored in conversations with 26 participants that they interviewed for it, right? That's interesting. So what do we do then? Well, we can enable users to change the font and font size, choose presets to display captions or for the display of captions, relocate the caption potentially to the bottom, like further down, right? And also have a settings to use captions by default, because some people always use captions. Some people never use captions, or only if they absolutely want to. So there must be a notion or setting to be enabling it by default or not. Now, I also put all of those findings in here in an article that I've written. So if you're interested in this kind of topic, please go ahead and go find that article. Just one thing I want to finish up with here is for the parliament, what we ended up deciding or designing right now, thinking about having, is clear search through transcripts. Meaning, whenever you go to the front page of the Multimedia Center, my goal was to minimize the carbon footprint that would be produced by people downloading too many videos, too many images, and too many audio files. So straight from the homepage of the Multimedia Center, you'll be able to search for the transcript and then get to the topic that is interesting for you and to the segment that is interesting for you and download only that, right? This is kind of one of the parts in there, obviously available in different languages, right? And also accompanied with some things like most played segments or anything like that without actually having to show this particular image. So I know I'm totally overrunning time again, but this is everything that I've mentioned today on one single slide. So feel free to take a screenshot or use it later in any way that you like. Sum up, captions are often used by default. Subtitles are translations for hearing people. Captions are for people who are hard of hearing. Audio descriptions for people who are hard of seeing. Closed captions are typically used for video players, open captions for social media. When we apply captioning guidelines, we can actually make reading experience more comfortable. Flags are not languages, so we should label languages locally, right? Consider native integrations, we talked about that, search in transcripts, and always think about videos having high environmental costs. So one thing that we also will have in the European Parliament is an option to use audio only, because most people watch with video just living in the background, right? So that's it from me. I think the only thing I want to mention here at this point is if you're interested in more around this, I have a little video course on not on captions and not on subtitles, but on many things around interface design and UX. So if you're interested, let me know if there is any value for this. And you can also get a little discount with the magical word bagel. I think I'm totally overrunning, so thank you so much for being here, and I'm very much looking forward to your questions now.
Thank you, Vitaly. You had said that it would be interesting, and it absolutely was. I really thank you so much for your presentation. There's a lot to think about there. I really loved, and you mentioned this in the middle about the text messages. And I'm really wondering if we are moving towards a closed caption or subtitle world because of the rise of text messaging as a means of communication. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a very good point, because one thing that really happened with text messages coming up, there was a need in movies to actually show text messages. And that actually created this rise of ideas again around how to display that. And I think in many ways, this is actually what really changed it all, because previously we didn't have this issue at all. So I think for sure, we are definitely moving to the place where I think many more players in the future, especially now that we have Gen Z, really, like, again, almost 2/3 of Gen Z population will be using subtitles by default. And it's only going to go up from now on, right? So I think that it wouldn't be very surprising to me that, maybe in a few years from now on YouTube and Vimeo and all the other platforms, we will not have to choose subtitles or captioning at all. It will be just enabled by default, but it will be smarter. That's my hope. Right now, it's just often very poorly edited text that doesn't really communicate much. So that's that.
So we have a lot to learn and to improve upon. I love that. Thank you so much, Vitaly. Thank you for your time and your expertise.